I think we can begin. I'd like to welcome everybody to Shmita and Sanity in the Kitchen with Dr. Josh Klein. I am very excited about this. First of all, before I give my little intro, I just wanted to say that the series, this night and tonight and next Tuesday is in English, and then it'll be in Hebrew tomorrow night and next Wednesday. And the series is sponsored by Shoshana and Chuck Levine, honoring with gratitude the Daf Yomi teachers and all of the outstanding teachers of Matan and Matan Beit Shemesh. So thank you very much. Also, it is sponsored by the Stein and Zivotofsky families in memory of Avraham Eliyahu ben Shalom and Faige Perel, Zichrono Livracha, the beloved grandfather of Atara Stein and Naomi Zivotofsky. So thank you very much. Speaking of Naomi Zivotofsky, it is Rabbi Ari Zivotofsky's to his credit that we have Dr. Joshua Klein with us, who is a senior researcher for the Unit of Agriculture according to the Torah, Institute of Plant Sciences, Agricultural Research Organization, the Volcani Center. So when Ari said to me that he recommended that Dr. Josh Klein speak with us, as an Ola, I still get excited about the fact that the Department of Agriculture of my country has on staff someone whose job it is to make sure that we figure out ways to fulfill the mitzvot hatuluyot ba'aretz. And I'm very, very excited to have this year. And I thank you very much for giving of your time. So without further ado.
Greetings. Happy 52nd evening of the Omer for those who are still counting. The Unit for Agriculture according to the Torah was founded back when the religious parties in the Knesset had even more power than they do now, believe it or not. It's about 60 years ago. My predecessor, well, we'll get to that in just a second, who my predecessor was. Tonight I'll be speaking on Shmita and Sanity in the Kitchen. Out of curiosity, I don't see more than 4 squares here, but and I know that people like Zivotofsky, and at this point I must thank the sponsors, the Zivotofsky family, the Stein family, and the Levine family, or Levine, for their sponsorship. It is greatly appreciated. It will go directly to technical work on the experiment, some of which I'll be relating to. So first things first, I'm going to be doing as much as possible of this in English. The psukim will be the psukim in English. So anyway, it says in Pirkei Avos that if you quote something in the name of the person who said it, you bring salvation to the world. And it says, Esther l'melech b'shem Mordechai. And here's where I shout out, as one says, Moshe Zaks, one of the founders of Kibbutz Sha'albim and the founder of the job that I've been holding for the past 30 years. And Yehoshua tends to come after Moshe. So that is the situation here. My former technician, Yonit Raz Shalev, Leonid Korol, who retired a few years ago, did the molecular biology on my behalf. Yes, there was some molecular biology. Currently, Shlomo Cohen is my field technician, and Maoz Isakovich, although he's pictured in the field, is my lab technician. So what are these mitzvot, land of Israel-based mitzvot, that we are studying? Well, one of them is Shemitah. For us, it's Shemitah 7 out of 7. We're always doing things to see how we can make Shemitah agriculturally, let's say, more manageable. It's a mitzvah, but mitzvah sometimes have to be managed also. And I'll talk about a few details of that. But we also work on things like Orla, which is managing flowering of fruit trees. People who don't worry about Orla would like to know if they can knock off 1/3 of their flowers on the fruit trees and get larger fruit. So we've developed chemical ways of managing the flowering of certain fruit trees. Kilayim, which is all kinds of interspecies mixing, but one of them that is agriculturally prominent is grafting a scion, the top part of the tree, of the bearing tree, to a rootstock, which you would do for various reasons to help the fruit grow better. The question is, what if it's a different species, halachically? Is it true that a species according to Linnaeus is the same thing as a species according to the Rambam? No, is the answer. And therefore I get to consult with various Rabbanim, and they explain to me about halacha, and I explain to them about agriculture. And we meet someplace about 1/3 into my field. I work on arba minim, on yield and storage of esrogim, wilting in willow. The farmers were not thrilled about wilting in willow because that means that they would sell fewer willow branches during Sukkos. I was thinking of the consumer angle, not thinking of the farmer angle. So that one, there's one farmer now who's interested. He wants to sell a super wilt-resistant willow. So you may see that on your market sometime. And utilizing leftover vegetation. Willows are a natural source of salicylic acid, aspirin. So we use that for healthy grazing for goats and sheep. And you can use these oils from hadassim, from myrtle, to disinfest insects. And kosher Pesach, wheat silage for cattle. Not that cattle have to keep Pesach, but the farmer does. And therefore, rather than feed them corn, which takes a lot of water and grows with some difficulty, then how can you have wheat silage that is not going to be over on the Isur of Chametz? We work on that. Tafshin Pei, Haba Aleinu L'Tova, is a leap year. It's also Shemitah. How can this be that we're going to have an extra month of Shemitah? Well, it turns out that it's a mathematical certainty. Yes, an extra month. Yep. All these in yellow are Shemitah years. Oh, excuse me, all of these are Shemitah years. The ones in yellow are the leap years. So those of you who tootled into being sometime between 1950 and 1970 didn't really see or pay attention to a leap year Shemitah until 1972, if then. But 2007 was a leap year. The next one, leap year for Shemitah, and it has a periodicity. In 1839, there were 35 years between leap year Shemitot, and then it was every other year, then 2, then 1, then 1, then 2, then 1, and then 35. And as I say, it goes periodicity. Those of you who will be fortunate enough to be born sometime later, or have only been born very recently, will get to see the next great blank period of non-leap year Shemitot. This contradicts, of course, what we learned in the Sanhedrin and Yud Beis Amud Aleph. You don't make Shemitah a leap year, so you don't lengthen the prohibition against plowing. And you don't make Shemitah, you don't make the 8th year, post-Shemitah, a leap year, because Yoshan, your old stock, is running out. And if you make Pesach late, that means you won't be, everything will be Chadash up until then. And therefore, for the sake of humanity, of Shmiras Mitzvahs humanity, you don't make Shemitah a leap year. Rambam in Kiddush HaChodesh agrees with that. Nonetheless, that's where we are. I've spoken to a number of people about it, and none of them, even the Sanhedrin people, there are a few, don't want to get into it. Rabbi Zev Weitman, the chief rabbi of Tznuva and a major kashrus authority, wrote a book 2 Shemitot ago on Shemitah Mamlachtit b'Medinat Yisrael. How do you do it? How do you make Shemitah as a national institution? The same way that you would say that certain lands don't get sown at all, certain lands are going to be parks, some of them are going to be cities, some of them are going to be villages, and some of them, the agricultural ones, we're going to ignore them every 7 years. It's hard to do in modern times having started sometime back in the year 750 or so. So it says, when you come to the land that I'm giving you, the land must be given a rest period. Agriculturally, this makes sense. It gives a chance for a lot of diseases not to have anything to feed on. They die out, the same thing with insects. But what are the people going to eat? And how are they going to survive? In the meantime, Pasuk says, Sadcha lo tizra, karmacha lo tizmor. It's God's Sabbath. You can't plant your fields. You can't prune your vineyards. You can't harvest crops that grow on their own, which are called spichim. You can't gather the grapes on your unpruned vines because it's a year of rest. Whatever grows while the land is resting can be eaten by you, by your slaves, by everybody who lives with you, and all of the domestic and wild animals, and we'll see that's going to be an important point actually, they have access to it also. So if in the field, the two malachot, the two classic work jobs of Shemitah are sowing and reaping, zri'ah uktsira. In the vineyard, they are zmira, pruning, and b'tzira, harvesting. And from this, we extend it to anything else. So it's not just wheat and barley and 3 other of the 5 grains, but it could be carrots, it could be artichokes, it could be watermelon. It's not just grapes, it is also apples, it is also figs, it is also pomegranates and everything else that grows on a tree of the 7 species. But it says when you come into the land that this is what we're going to do. Where's the land of Israel? Can we grow crops without land in the 7th year? What about if we store the harvested crops from the 6th year? Is that okay? Is there any kind of notion like chametz she'avar alav Pesach, like yield of the 6th year, she'avar alav Shemitah? Can we stretch the growth of what was sown in the 6th year? If we started it in the 6th year, can we still grow it in the 7th year? And is Shemitah only about the land? So let's get a few concepts now. There's Kedushat Shvi'it, which is the sanctity of the 7th year. It's attached to things, not to people, and it is partially attached to the time of the 7th year. There is Heterokira, which is selling the land, which we're not supposed to do, but there's still a way to do it because we are Jews, and ours is a legalistic religious system. There are malachot asurot umutarot. There are some forbidden and permitted agricultural activities, and 2 other concepts, otsar beit din and pat shmita. Otsar beit din is a mechanism whereby without selling the land, you still manage to distribute the produce to those who want it. And pat shmita is a special disposal of things that have the sanctity, crops, produce that has the sanctity of Shvi'it, of Shemitah, that you still want to get rid of, either because you don't like lima beans or because the banana is looking browner than usual. So where is Eretz Yisrael? There's the biblical Eretz Yisrael. There's many depictions of the borders. There's the military, from King David to King Moshe Dayan. And there's political, from Shlomo Melech to Bibi HaMelech. And there's also Chaim Fefer, who Topol sang, Efo, 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 Eretz Yisrael. I shan't sing the whole thing, you'll be gratified. According to this famous map by Bunting, 500 years ago, 450 years ago, Jerusalem is in the center of the world, but he only had 3 continents. He had a vague idea that there was something else up here. Turned out to be Greenland. What are the borders? Here's Shimon Peres, stopping just before the border, wherever it was. Here's the original borders of Palestine, maybe. And here are the borders as depicted by Hashem. However, the signposts that are given in Bamidbar, in Perek Lamed Daled, are not ones that we really know very well. And for our purposes, what we are trying to define are these northern and southern boundaries. The southern boundary goes from Ktsei Yam HaMelech Kedma. It goes from the tip of Yam HaMelech, and we're pretty sure we know that this is Yam HaMelech. Kedma usually means east, but in this case it's going west. Nachal Mitzrayim is our southwestern border. Yam HaGadol is the Mediterranean, that's our western border. The Nahar HaGadol, Nahar Prat, is sometimes the eastern border, but most people will agree that ultimately it's the Jordan River. Where are we at the north and where are we at the south? It's a matter also as to who was here and when. So when Olei Mitzrayim, the first conquest under the leadership of Joshua, crossed at Gilgal and conquered as much of the land as they could, they got a nice chunk. However, of what was promised. However, There was the exile after the burning of the destruction of the first temple. And Olei Bavel, the ones who came back from Bavel after Dariavush, or Koresh, excuse me, let them come back. They basically got the blue parts. They didn't get what we now call Otef Aza, actually a bit deeper than Otef Aza. And they didn't get from Nachal Ziv north. This was Plishtim. And this whole area here is very much Medinat Yisrael, even Akko still. So let's take a look at the Yam HaMelech. There was a nice website that used to allow you to plot the borders of Yam HaMelech over time. I took some screenshots once upon a time, and now the link is dead. It's not my fault. Anyway, the time of Avraham Avinu, about 1600 BCE, Yam HaMelech was about the same size as it is now. 400 years later, 600 years later, during the time of Melech David, it was pretty big. In fact, the time of sealing the Talmud, already into the CE state of things, it was about the same size as that of Avraham Avinu. And the state of Israel's founding was the same size as King David. This shows that the Yam HaMelech goes up and down, and the southern border is not a defined thing. In fact, here's some pictures from 72, 89, 2011, and you see particularly along the Israeli coast of the northern part of the Dead Sea, it's shrinking, it's shrinking. It's, honey, I shrunk the sea. And it's true that we are doing it partially, but it's also partly a natural rise and fall phenomenon. It being geologic, it takes a long time to take place. Where is the southern boundary of the Dead Sea? Let me first quote Rabbi Ashtori Hafarchi, Baal Sefer Kaftor V'Ferach, in which he said that his efforts and all his research and mapping of Eretz Yisrael is that he wanted to expand as much as possible places where you would observe the mitzvot that are associated with the land. That was his interest. I'm not going to bring a whole bunch of maps in. Ashtori Hafarchi had one also. It was a pretty good map for the 1300s. I'll just point out that where Kibbutz Keturah is just north of what is now considered the border. Latitude, by the way, has almost always, Rambam cites latitude when he's talking about the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. Longitude is the new thing. That came to be in full use sometime in the late 1500s, early 1600s. So going north to south is easy. Going east to west was hard, which is why we only hear about people doing that, starting with the Vikings, maybe, at least from east to west. As it turns out, the Dead Sea Depression that geologically held water really stretches quite a ways. And if you were to look at this tip down here, you would hit approximately just north of Kibbutz Yotvata. Please pronounce it Yotvata, not Yotvata. It's the stress is on the first syllable in this case. And that, by almost all halachic authorities, is the southern boundary of Eretz Yisrael, but not of Medinat Yisrael. There are some who stretch it a little bit up towards Lotan. It's, as they say, it's a stretch. So down here, there are people who keep 2 days Yom Tov in Eilat, saying that that's Chutz La'aretz. Up around over here, where the second Aliyah from Bavel did not recapture that, there are those who say that Melechot Mid'Rabbanan for Shemitah are permitted, and Mechon Torah V'Aretz will expand upon that enormously. So where do we have non-Eretz Yisrael produce within the state of Israel? Well, as I said, Kibbutz Yotvata is one of them. And over here, these are Harei Edom, that's Jordan over there. And these are vegetables that are growing out there in the kibbutz, and halachically it is permitted to grow them and certainly to eat them during Shemitah. Eretz Yisrael Lamaise is really pretty small. I mean, even smaller than maybe not Yisrael, certainly. So this is where historically we hung out, this kind of angry pink center here. Beit Shemesh should be over there roughly, I think. And Rehovot is over here by Plishtim, over there. So it's pretty small. Getting back to our Shemitah question, what do we do when we can't use the land to produce food for us? Well, one way of looking at it is saying, why do we need the land? We'll do soilless horticulture, hydroponics. Meir Schwartz, who as far as I know is still around, was one of the developers of the system worldwide. He developed it for Shemitah, but it spread. And it's good for high value crops like herbs, or if you're from England, herbs, vegetables, flowers. So here's a setup that we had once upon a time. Here's lettuce, there's some tomatoes, but this is no good for wheat. You can't grow enough wheat. This one tube here will not grow enough wheat for one roll for Shabbos, and everybody knows you need two. It doesn't do a good job with potatoes and carrots either. So for something high value, hydroponics could be a way of growing without using the land of Israel. Or you could have soilless culture, matzah minutak, grown by guys who are somewhat divorced from the soil of Eretz Israel also, although they speak Hebrew just well, thank you, and some of them know halacha. So they're growing on a doubly insulated plastic on top of Admat Kodesh. This happens to be near Rehovot. And they are going to grow not connected to the ground of Israel. And they're going to grow either peppers or tomatoes, I can't remember. What if we store the fruit or the vegetables? You can refrigerate it. It's not good for everything. Nobody wants lettuce that's 6 months old. Most flowers do not last very long, even if kept cool. And there's a question of cost benefit. But for some things that can store well anyhow, like sweet potatoes or regular potatoes, sweet potatoes and regular potatoes aren't related at all. Back here, whenever I ask, what do people think this is? They say it's sprouts, it's mung beans gone wild, it's who knows what. It's actually potatoes that were not treated. And it's pretty hairy, tarte mashma. How do you store a potato for a long time? Well, as it turns out, if you leave them untreated, then they will sprout and you can't sell them. Not only because of the way they look, but because the sprouts take away, they use up moisture and energy from the potato itself. But using mint oil as a spray every few months burns the growing tip of the sprouts, and you can actually store the potatoes for 12 months. And before you want to ask, no, they do not taste like Crest or Gleam or any other toothpaste. We wanted to do this for carrots. Carrots normally can store quite well. I show this because people say, oh, you're doing experiments, you must always be finding things and developing things. Well, sometimes it's not even 2 steps backwards. Sometimes it's just, let's get out of the mud hole here. These were all treatments that were supposed to preserve the carrots nicely. These are the controls. They look okay. These are the sophisticated treatments. And we wound up with something that looked like a 15-year-old yeshiva bacher trying his first beard. It didn't work. We're not ashamed to show our failures also. From these we learn as well. And here is serendipity. This is Reb Lezer Gerelik, a premier grower of esrogim at Kfar Chabad, very close to where I work at Volcani. And he was very proud to show me in 2015, his esrog from 2014 that he had kept in a bag on his desk, unair conditioned, uncooled, unregulated, and it looked quite nice. This was one that had just been harvested that day, I think. Subsequently, we've actually tried doing this on a larger scale, and unfortunately, I can't report major success yet. Yes, I can keep them in good shape, but the color is still off. It goes too yellow. And people are very, very finicky about their etrogim. And even though it's a mitzvah to use produce of the 7th year, they don't want to use it if it's not the right color, they say, even though that it's not ma'akev on the mitzvah. This is Kibbutz Mishmar HaNegev. These are their wheat fields. They have water. These are the fields, some of the fields of Rahat, the largest Bedouin city in Israel. It has about 35,000 people now, I think. This is the only political slide that I'm going to be showing. V'hamivin yavin. How do you keep seeds going in drought? If you're sowing before Rosh Hashanah, then you're not going to have adequate water in the soil to maintain things. We developed seed treatments using this very nice Scrabblicious word here that preserved the growth of wheat seedlings, even in the case of drought. The problem is that it could be early rain, and then if the rain stops, there's a lot of sprouts, but then things die down. Then when the main rains come sometime around Hanukkah, a little bit earlier, then there's regrowth, but it's really not enough. And although the ones that are there are growing, there's not enough of them. If we treated the seeds, though, they didn't sprout at this first minor rain, and then they grew very nicely. This is work that I do with David Bonfield down at our Gilad experiment station. And here we see survival, and here we see death. When we rewatered, finally, the ones that have been grown from treated seeds were fine. We're hoping to use this. The impetus is Shemitah, but the customer is really climate change. Let's talk a bit about Heterokira. What is it? If you're into potato chips, and most people are, you can see that from 2 Shmitot ago, these were sold al pi Heterokira and did not have the much desired badatz hechsher. This was yivul chutz la'aretz. These were imported potatoes that were used to make chips, and these were local grown potatoes that were used to make chips. And the hashkachot were different. People think that Heterokira is something from Rav Kook's time. It's not. It's actually close to 500, almost exactly 500 years old. Moshe ben Yosef Titrani, known as the Mabit in Tzfat, the Jews had got to Tzfat by way of Turkey after the expulsion from Spain. So the timing here is about 30 years or so after the expulsion from Spain, and the Jews had already been allowed to get down to Eretz Yisrael, which was under Turkish rule at that point. So he said, look, we have land taxes, which is what Rabbi Yehuda was complaining about back in the time of the Mishnah also, with the Romans. And so he sold the land for 2 years so that he would have money to pay the taxes. And this was one way of accommodating both Shemitah and getting funds. 81 years later, Rav Moshe Galanti said that the northern lands of Israel were only Olei Mitzrayim, not Olei Bavel. Everybody now, in modern times, the Mechon Torah Haaretz people particularly promote the idea that the lands around Otef Aza were not really Jewish settled. But actually, north of Achziv, it was pretty much the same case up until relatively recently, past 100 years or so. So Rav Moshe Galanti said those lands you could grow in. It's not Olei Bavel. In Hebron, 150 years after that, Rav Mordechai Rubio, who was Mem Reish and therefore known as Shemen Hamor, he said, I will sell my vineyard officially. It was worked by the non-Jew. I don't know what the non-Jew was making. He was less likely to be Muslim than to be Christian, but maybe he was selling to the Christians. I'm not sure. There is a question about selling altogether to a non-Jew. And there are people who typed out the phrase lo techanem, which is in Dvarim, Perek Zayin Pasuk Bet. And the Shemen Hamor said that lo techanem, which means don't give them chanaya, don't let people stay in our land, is not relevant, as if we do invent a takana for this problem, if we don't invent, I should have said a takana for this problem, he called it a problem, but I will relate to that very soon. Every God-fearing person will flee rather than purchase a land holding for fields or vineyards. And where are we going to be? If every 7 years people say, I can't take this, and leave, it won't work. People tend to discuss Shemitah and many other things as a problem. The problem of kashrut, the problem of Shemitah, the problem of, I don't know, Shabbat. It's not a problem, it's a mitzvah. If you want to talk about a problem, talk about v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. That's a real problem. Fix that one as the problem. Shemitah, we have takanot. And here is, speaking of takanot of Shemitah, here is Avraham Yitzchak Cohen Cook and his great nephew, Simcha Cohen Cook. May he speedily find succor and health, the chief rabbi of Rehovot, where I live. And he is the one who in modern times most is identified with the Heter Mechira. But before he dipped his toe in religious politics, how was the land sold? Once the people started coming back in the Aliyah Rishona in the mid-1800s, what did people do? In one Shemitah, they sold the tree with its required soil for growth, so as to limit how much soil was being sold of Eretz Yisrael. This obviously should be 1888. Another solution was to sell the land temporarily to a non-Jew. And this is what's been done for the past 130 years or so, 120 years. Behind this was Reb Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. He was the Gadol Hador of those times. He, of course, is the namesake of Yeshiva University. Last Shemitah, the chief rabbinate said that Heterokira will be used. There were a lot of politics involved and some religion. The Hetero will be minimized as much as possible, which is understandable. And each farmer will have to participate individually and personally, and there won't be a wholesale Heter. It's not like people also think, sometimes mistakenly, that all the chametz in Israel is sold or all the land is sold. Nope, you actually have to sign up and say that you want it to be sold. There is a form, and there are religious implications and applications to this. And each farmer, when they did a survey 1.5 Shmitot ago, they discovered that land that had been farmed by Ahmed, when they finally got down to the tabu, they said, and everybody around, Jew and non-Jew, said, yeah, that's Ahmed's family land. He's been growing cotton there for who knows how long, or sesame or something. Turns out, nope, it belongs to some Goldstein who bought it around the 1920 or so. On the other hand, it turns out that land that Kibbutz Vesnisht was farming ever since they came to their land and danced many a hora, it actually belonged to Ahmed's family. Ahmed didn't know this, the kibbutz didn't know this. It was actually, they were farming non-Jewish owned land. This has finally got straightened out, but it took a long time. So what are the principles of the Heter Mechira? Shemitah these days is midrabanan. There is no kedushat shvi'it in produce from the land of a non-Jew. A non-Jew's ownership invalidates the land's holiness. You may sell land to a non-Jew for the benefit of a Jew. The sale is for 2 years officially, and they say it's a temporary stopgap until Mashiach, or, please God, even earlier. And who are these guys who own thousands of hectare, millions of dunam? Well, 2 Shmitot ago, it was Aluf B'Miluim Ghanem Chamda, here, carefully not wearing a kippah. Last Shemitah, they got even better, and they got a guy called George Streichman, who is a Shomer Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, which means that he probably keeps those mitzvos much better than any of these guys with beards and hats. And paradoxically, he lives on Rehov Harawet, which is cute. He put down 2,000 shekel, and he got something that was worth 125 billion shekel, which is a good deal. It's a very good deal. Who are against the Heter Mechira? Well, the one who is most identified modern times is Avraham Yishayahu Karelitz, known as the Chazon Ish, Avraham Yishayahu Aleph Yud that's Ish, his Chazon, his vision. His great nephew Nisim Karelitz is the Mamshich Derech. Chazon Ish was fantastic for at least one major reason. Here he is visiting Kibbutz Chafetz Chaim, 1952, just before Shemitah, and he was actually going out into the field. There are not enough Rabbanim who go out into the field. I am called frequently to advise Rabbanim about the metzius of things, and it is astonishing what they don't know about the actual, what many do not know. And I wouldn't say they, there are some who are quite familiar, but there's not enough. So puk chazeh, go out and see with your own eyes what's going on before you're koveya halacha. And here is Rav Kook under the watchful eyes of his great uncle signing a document for Sandy Kolb saying that his 300 dunam would actually be operating as an Otsar Beis Din. We'll get to Otsar Beis Din pretty soon, not under Heterokira. How do you check, how do you maintain the land? How do you maintain your agricultural land under the terms of an Otsar Beis Din, under non-Heterokira? Well, here's Rav Kook in better days, 2 Shmitot ago. And here it is 2 days after Yom Kippur, and potatoes that were sown before Rosh Hashanah are growing sufficiently so that you could say, if you were an informed agronomist, that these were certainly growing before Rosh Hashanah. They sowed them before probably a couple of weeks before Rosh Hashanah. They already started sprouting, therefore halachically they were established. You could do this with wheat, you can do this with carrots, you can do this with many, many field crops. Last Shemitah, though, there were these bare spots in the potato fields. And the question came, oops, maybe we're going to have to set up signs or dig these up because they will be sfichin. It'll be something that was established during Shemitah, even though we sowed them all before Shemitah. So Rav David Stein and I went out to the field, and he scrabbled around in a hill and was very pleased to find that these had germinated as well. They just hadn't broken the surface yet, and they were considered that the field was entirely germinated before Shemitah. So there's different crops that we have to look at overall, vegetables and fruit. So we have Shemitah of vegetables. Some people say that it's being done by vegetables and for vegetables. Let's look into it. The bracha indicates when the kedusha starts. If you're making a bracha b'rei pri ha'adama after harvesting it, that means from the time that Shemitah starts, even if the plant was planted in the 6th year, that's b'rei pri ha'adama. That means it has kedushat shvi'it, unless, of course, the land has been sold. But we're going to assume that the land has not been sold for this purpose. Sanctity from the start of Shemitah. If you're saying b'rei pri ha'etz, it depends on when the fruit was formed, not when the fruit was picked. It is sanctity, it's kedushat shvi'it, it was formed during Shemitah. Usually the first fruit of a season, and therefore the first fruit with kedushat shvi'it in the 7th year, will be the shesek, also known as the lokwa, another good Scrabble word. But after that comes the early peaches, which you shouldn't buy because they don't taste like anything, and the nectarines, etc. There are lists of lists. The question is, when is things sfichin? When do you not have to worry that something was established during Shemitah? When do you not have to worry that something was harvested before Shemitah? There will be many lists that come in. This is just an example. I just took the first part of the alphabet here. I do want to warn you, however, that some of the people who make lists are not the same people who go out into the field. And I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. Kedushat Shvi'it really begins on the 1st of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, but the 3rd of Tishrei, or some calendars, sometimes the 4th of Tishrei, if Tzom Gedalia turns out to be on a Shabbos, then the Havamina is that there was no harvesting on Rosh Hashanah. And in 99% of the cases, that's true, but there are some davkaniks in the world. Tree fruits have Shemitah sanctity, and in tree fruits, there are 2 years of Shemitah. It really can work like that. So in the 8th year, you will have apples and pears that set fruit during that Shemitah year, but they're not harvested until later on, and they can be stored for 6, 8, even 12 months, and they will have the sanctity of Shemitah if their land was not sold out from under them. Nuts, but not, of course, peanuts, which are b'rei pri ha'adama. Citrus, those will all be Shemitah fruit, but not peaches and plums and nectarines, which are all done by the end of the Shemitah year. They start early in the season, and you're not going to find peaches and plums in the market after midsummer, towards the end. Certainly I have a shesek, and bananas. Bananas are not halachically a fruit anyway. So they will go batar likita, from when they were harvested. They could have grown during Shemitah. If they were harvested after Rosh Hashanah, then it will still be of the 8th year because they are Borei Pri Ha'adama. So here's an example of, this is from last Shemitah, of when they say the Kedushat Shvi'it begins, when it ends, and time for Biur. We're going to talk about Biur in a minute. And it goes along to almonds dry, almonds green, which is mostly an Arabic Shemaichel, Anona, which is a lovely fruit, but many people of our ethnicity in Judaism don't know it. Apples, apricots, blueberries, they say has no Kedusha. This is flat out wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. Blueberries grow on trees. The bracha on blueberries is Borei Pri Ha'etz. The subject came up in the Rabbanut again, and I was one of a few people who were brought in to discuss this matter. Blueberries have as much Kedushat Shvi'it as apples or pears. So you do have to be careful from where you buy your halacha. Flowers, if they are scented, also have Kedushat Shvi'it. If they are not scented, there are some who say they don't have Kedushat Shvi'it. There are lists upon lists available in Hebrew and probably in English. Just as an example of a list, I'm going to skip ahead to this. You will find all kinds of wrappings that say this is Lemahadrin Shnas Shemitah Yevul Nochri, which is not so Mahadrin because it just means that the guy in the greenhouse next door happens not to be a Jew. Or it could be somebody who grew in Matzah Menutak, vaguely hydroponically. And it could be somebody with several different kashrus stamps on there, but this is Mahadrin Heter Mechira, you will notice. So the educated consumer will have to look very carefully at the labels to make sure that you know what you're getting. And this is in the first case of Chasalat. This is Chasalat Lo Shash Tevel Shvi'it. It says Yud Nun, which is Yivul Nochri, which means it was officially grown by non-Jews. And on this case, there was an embarrassing sticker saying, we're sorry, there are actually bugs in this, well, you got to wash it. I haven't seen that sticker for a long time. I hope they solve their problem. You have to be aware of the fact that it depends. I have to get more accurate figures because it is changing all the time. About 30% of the cucumbers, about 50% of the squash, zucchini, marrow, whatever English you speak, are grown by Arabs on Arab land. And there are many who would therefore buy them, not considering that they have Kedushat Shvi'it. The early strawberries very often come from the Kalansua area, which means that they too are Yivul Nochri. And that is something to consider. They usually will have an indication of this, though. And what happens when you don't want to eat it? You know, the strawberry turned out not to be ripe. The cucumber, you left it in the refrigerator for 4 weeks and were disgusted by what you saw. But it still may have had Kedushat Shvi'it if you didn't buy it from a non-Jewish owner. B'nai Brak puts out very nicely labeled and very nicely chained receptacles for Shemitah. You could gild your lily if you wish, but you can also do the household version. And Rabbi Yehuda Levi Amichai from Mechon Torah Ba'aretz says there's no need to let the produce rot inside the house. You let it sit for a while. When it becomes a little bit mius, you know, most people don't want to eat it, you throw it out. And if you don't want to leave it there, then you double wrap it and you throw it away as usual. But if you want to have a separate Shemitah receptacle, a separate Pach Shemitah, then you can do that. Biur. Okay. You can only eat from Shemitah produce when it is still available in the field to everybody. Because the Pasuk says, Livhem techa, v'lachaya she'ba'artzecha, tiachol t'vuata le'echol. If all the animals have access to it. As long as the animals can eat the produce, you can eat the same produce that you have at home of that same type. But kalei lechaya min hasadeh, if it's not available to the animal in the field, chayav leva'er oto hamin min habayit. So you have to do biur, which is literally burning or destroying. And there are tables of when this time is also. Karmacha lo tizmor. This is hard. You do not get a good grape yield, neither table grape nor wine grape, if you don't prune your vineyard at the correct time. There's my man Shlomi Cohen. This is Rav Efrati. And this is Shimon Biton, who is the Korean. He's got 1,200 dunam of grapes. And he wants to know, what do I do? So in Elul, Erev Shemitah, 2 Shemitah ago, this is what his Thai workers were doing. They were working at 50% capacity. They could not possibly do as good a job as they would in the winter when all the leaves are off. And what's worse, it comes back because the grapevine thinks that it's summertime because it's still warm, but it doesn't have leaves, so it produces new leaves, which is great if you have a lot of rice that you want to stuff in the leaves, but that's not usually why people grow grapevines with the leaves. I will mention that wine that has Kedushat Shvi'it, which will come to the market no earlier, I hope, than the year after Shemitah, is usually particularly fine wine. I have found this in the 5 Shmitot that I've been here so far, and I recommend to you to purchase your wines carefully. I bought a bottle of Shemitah wine for 15 shekels last week. Clearly the store was, and usually after 7 years, most of these wines are not made with the idea that it should be stored on their side in a cool cave for 25 years. This was still good. Other rosés would have, at best price, would have been dead. Shemitah wine is good. I commend to you to find wine from the year of Shemitah. I don't know why this is. Otsar based in, as opposed to Heterokira. Really, the things that can be sold in an Otsar based in store, it's called a store, but it's really a tachanat chalukah, a place where you give things out, should be only stuff that was sown before Rosh Hashanah and grew during Shemitah, or stuff that grew off on a tree during Shemitah. These two things have Kedushat Shvi'it. In practice, many of these tachanot chalukah have to make money. So they sell Yivul Shishit, which you could buy anywhere. Avraham Zivotofsky, I found 3 bottles of Kedushat Shvi'it wine at Yenot Matan near Volcani. I wouldn't say that it's worth a trip from Beit Shemesh, though. And they will also sell imports. Never mind the politics. Turkey will sell us a lot of tomatoes, a number of eggplants. Jordan will supply us with huge numbers of cucumbers and other field crops. And when this all calms down speedily in our days, the people in Gaza will also be selling us vegetables and maybe even a little bit of citrus. But since you cannot sell Kedushat Shvi'it produce, it's certainly in the realm of wine, they actually add, they say 20% more matana. Well, this is so that it's at the same price, but they give it to you, they give you more. In some stores I saw they raised the price by 20% also. This is not what they were supposed to be doing. But you'll see 33% more because it's from Shemitah. This was 2 Shmitot ago. I don't know if they're going to do it again. It was somewhat of a pain, but I do recommend if you can get a hold of Shemitah wine, do it. The cheaper Semyon stuff, maybe not, but the better stuff, yes. Beit HaShita made 2 kinds of grapes, 2 kinds of olives. Some of them were Ivul Nochri, because in the Jezreel Valley, you got Nochrim there growing olives. So Kibbutz Beit HaShita said, sure, we'll process them and sell them. That's not a problem for us. You see, this one says it has Shviz, the Loch Shash Shviz, because it's from Heterokira, and this one says the Loch Shash Tevel and Orla, because it does have Kedushat Shviz. So what are our principal approaches to Shemitah as far as a consumer goes? Let's go from right to left. We're Jews. Heterokira, the land is sold to a non-Jew. It is a real sale. It's only a down payment, but it's a real sale. This is capitalism. Haaretz natan livnei adam. Yalla, let's sell it. Forbidden Torah work, seeding, harvesting the grain, harvesting the fruit, plowing, that is forbidden, even though it's the Heterokira that takes away the Kedushat Shvi'it, but it does not remove the prohibition against doing the work. It allows export, which is why it was invented. Time is too short to talk about the history of the politics of Kedushat Shvi'it, but it's somewhat interesting. You can sell the produce for money. This is not, I will give you a golda for 3 tomatoes. but it's identified with leniency, even though it's really a complicated system. Oaths are based in, and please note that it's based in, not based in, because oaths are based in. The land stays in Jewish hands. Ki li haaretz, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he gave it to us. The work is according to based in rules and wages, which is pretty much socialism. The produce has sanctity, has kedusha. It is distributed and not sold. The money that you are paying goes to the effort made to grow the stuff, to harvest it, to transport it. Sometimes the transport is done in cars that none of us can afford, but other people can. This is a mystery to me. It's identified with stringency, however, even though in many respects it is somewhat lenient. Shemitah-proof consumerism. Let's go get into it. How are you going to pay? There is a principle that if you spend money, the change cash on Shemitah sanctified produce, the change you get has Kedushat Shvi'it. Yes, the shekel coin, the 50 agara piece, I think even the paper money gets Kedushat Shvi'it. You don't really want to keep apart different change pockets and say, okay, this one I'm going to go down and I'm going to buy only stuff with Kedushat Shvi'it. Nobody really wants to do that, which is why God invented credit cards. The magnetic strip, although it is metal, does not acquire Kedushat Shvi'it. This is a good thing. And you can use any credit card you want. Otzar Haaretz 2 Shmitas ago had their own credit card. You charge it up and you have 600 shekels worth and it's a debit card. And it worked nicely as long as Otzar Haaretz worked. Unfortunately, halfway through Shemitah, they collapsed. It's hard to maintain a chain of Shemitah stores. It's really, truly difficult. What is the rationale? How can you actually pay for something if you're not allowed to exchange money, if you're only supposed to recompense the person who put out the effort? Well, halachically, it says in Avodah Zarah, Samach Beit Amud Beit, that the fruits no longer exist. So the sanctity of Shemitah is no longer true. You ate that tomato. You have devoured that potato. So you're not, its sanctity is gone, gone, gone. And the money that you're paying is actually to pay a debt because you owe for that potato or for that strawberry or melon. It's not directly to pay for Shemitah produce. Does this sound a little bit weaselly? Yes. Please do not examine many other halachic things that also have mechanisms for going around them. We can start with the time switch on Shabbos. Shemitah money. This is havla'ah. How do we, if we are going to pay for something that has Kedushat Shvi'it, how could we pay cash anyway? The classic case is brought in the Gemara in Masechet Sukkah, where to boil this all down, you're buying a lulav and you're getting an esrog with it. Most people these days think that the esrog is, you pay more for an esrog than for a lulav. But if it has Kedushat Shvi'it, then you would be actually spending your 50, or I hope less, shekels on the lulav, and the guy is throwing in an etrog as part of the deal. So your money is not going to have Kedushat Shvi'it because you bought the lulav and the etrog came with. Like so. In principle, this would work with, squeegees and apples as well. It doesn't have to be lulavim and esrogim, but the Gemara in Sukkah was not dealing with squeegees and apples. So any non-Kedushat Shvi'it item that if you have an amenable storekeeper, then fine. I just put this in because it's Yivul Chul. I just like the idea that there was a variety of wine called Walla Red. I'm not sure that I would use it for all 4 cups. I'm not sure I would wake up until Chol HaMoed. Prigat and many other companies will put nice labels on there saying Lefi Heterokira, if you are concerned. So you would know that it was squozen from fruit that was produced during Shemitah, that grew on the tree during Shemitah. Etrogim will be hefker. Many things are hefker. See, there it says, etrog chazon ish are hefker. Moshe Naiman is a nice guy. He lets people come in. Sometimes when they throw out a whole bunch of esrogim, they just put a sign, Perel Kedushat Shvi'i. This actually, I think, I'm not sure if these were Trumos and Masros or not. No, if it's Kedushat Shvi'i, it's obviously not. So they just were taking them all off the tree and letting people take whatever they wanted, which is the way it should be. What are other sources of our fruit and veg during Shemitah? Well, there's Va'adat Shemitah, and this I took as pictures outside a super kosher supermarket. You can see it was a while ago. And they can come from Mejdal Shems. They could come from, which is up north, and they're famous for their delicious apples. Delicious is only the name, it's not the flavor. It could come from Kibbutz Elot, which is just a titch north of Eilat, and therefore is not in Eretz Yisrael. It could come from Albira, which is just north of Yerushalayim and is squack in the middle of Yehuda, but is not owned by Jews. It could come from Jenin, which is not likely to ever be owned by Jews. And the Shilton HaPalestinite was perfectly happy to sell tomatoes to the Yehud just because there was a need for them. Wadi Ram, a spectacularly beautiful area south and east of Petra in Jordan, can produce very nice grapes, and they can sell them to very nice people across the Jordan River. You can also freeze stuff from the 6th year, which is why in a Yesh store, I think this is from 2 Shemitot ago, you found dwarf carrots, you found okra, which should never be frozen, it should be thrown out as soon as you pick it. Edamame, corn, frozen. Believe me, it can be frozen for 2 years. It's not a difficulty organoleptically, except for the okra, which is bad even if it's fresh. Bananas. As soon as Rosh Hashanah of the 8th year comes to an end, you can harvest those bananas, even though they've been growing ever since Shivasar B'Tammuz, because it's Berei Pri Ha'adama, you can immediately, it's from Shminit, it's from the 8th year, and you can harvest them from the same plant. You can get stuff that was Kedushat Shvi'it. If you harvest it before Rosh Hashanah of the 8th year, if you harvest it afterwards, then it is Shminit. And here's some more Yivul Chutz La'aretz. It means that they didn't have to do it for from the 6th year. They could import it from wherever you import the various frozen veggies from. Finally, Barkol, which is one of these supermarket chains, during Shemitah had a long thing which I shall not read nor translate, about how we hope that everything here is kosher to your satisfaction. And more importantly, what they say, Anu tikva shelo te'areh takala tachat yadenu. And I too hope that all was truth and beauty in what I said tonight. I hope it explained a few things. I'm perfectly willing to answer questions. But before that, I would like to point out that kol zeh einenu shaveh li, none of this makes any difference unless we are fortunate enough to have peace in our borders, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will satisfy us with the finest of the wheat and all the other produce. Shenishtabcha b'hem Eretz Yisrael. Next week, I'll be discussing Shmita and Sanity in the garden, and I'll be emphasizing the unwittingly heroic work of Shendel Hagar of Vishnitz, the Rebbetzin of Vishnitz. In my eyes, she's a heroine of Shmita gardening. So, Ad Kan Lamadnu, and I'll be happy to entertain questions.
Thank you so much. And amen to your last little part there. If there are any questions, now is a great time.
Yeah, Josh?
I am here. I don't see with whom I am speaking.
Rebecca and Ezra?
If you stop sharing, it'll also help.
If I stop sharing. Okay, I'll stop sharing just to see my non-cousins, the Darshans.
Exactly, you know, the best non-cousins you have.
Yes, it's not, probably might not be my only non-cousins. Yes, hi.
Yeah, so...
you have a question on farming?
Yeah, sort of. Can you comment? I heard, I don't know if it's true, that a couple of Shmitas ago, the Badats invested a huge amount of money in cucumber farming across the Jordan River.
They didn't have to invest. It was already there.
Okay. What is the impact of things like that on Israeli agriculture?
Well, one of the pictures I didn't show you is of three guys who do not have the bodies of your stereotypical vegetable farmer, shall we say. They have long beards and glasses, and they're wearing keffiyehs, and they're having their passports examined as they cross into Jordan. And this is how they're hiding themselves. I've been in Jordan many times. I've got projects there with colleagues, and it's usually fairly easy to do. The impact of Jews ordering or buying cucumbers there is not extensive. I wouldn't worry. You can actually tell a Jordanian cucumber, at least in its original packaging, because they come in styrofoam boxes and they're standing up. And it's the only time I've seen cucumbers packed that way. But if you see them in the market, they're standing up, then you'll know it's a Jordanian cucumber. You say ahlan to it, and it says eat me. And I don't think that Israel is a major player in that. We do produce cucumbers hydroponically. They do produce cucumbers in places that are not Eretz Yisrael. It can be a matter of cost, to be really blunt about it. And I would also say, look at the quality to see if that's what's satisfying you. I don't think it's going to change the balance of payments or the GDP of either state in a huge way. The tomatoes from Turkey tend to be underripe, but tomatoes everywhere tend to be underripe these days.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Can I ask? Thanks. I have a question that's associated, and it seems an agronomist is the best person to ask. Every Shemitah, I hear rumors about jaundice being associated with some of the vegetables that are bought on during Shemitah, and it's a recurrent rumor. Can you comment on this?
Yes, it's not jaundice that is brought in, it's ignorance.
Good. Could you, is this just like a urban myth?
It is the cucumber cartel of Israel that is spreading vicious and ugly rumors about Jordanian cucumbers. No, it's, please, David, it says here David Fenster, although.
David and Davida. Yes.
You're David Fenster.
David.
Okay, I was confused.
Okay.
If it doesn't make sense to you, then you're probably right.
Is it true that Israel is not growing cucumbers any longer?
No.
It's true because I heard that they're long enough as they are. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. They're not growing them. Okay.
Yes, okay. My chavrusa is British also, and I have grown to understand many things.
Okay.
And thank you for your
Thank
answer.
you.
I did want an expert to weigh in on that. I've really appreciated.
Okay. Oh, excuse me. Ari Zivotofsky thinks that maybe it's not jaundice, but hepatitis A. People are injecting cucumbers. But no, overall, one thing that is true is that it's probably a good idea to wash your vegetables. I wouldn't go crazy over it. I wouldn't get all raccoony about it. But in some cases, then, if it looks dirty, it probably is. So wash it. But I wouldn't say just because it comes from Jordan. I mean, I've been in greenhouses or grow in fields in Jordan, and they don't look any worse or better than ones in Israel. And you seem to eat those vegetables anyway. Any other questions? No? I have a slight survey here. Most of you have done yourselves the favor blocking your video. But if you would just unblock it, or if you all know how to use your hand signaling thing there. How many of you have something approaching a garden in your house? I imagine that if many of you are Beit Shemesh types, then you are doing the suburban yuppie kind of thing. Okay, and therefore will gardening during Shemitah will be of some interest to you then, of ways to accomplish that. Okay, one last question about that. How many of you have fruit trees in your garden? Decent ones, not kumquats. Yeah, okay, good. So I will be happy to discuss that with you and to take questions also then.
Sorry, Josh.
Sir.
Josh, can I ask a question?
Oh, there's Tzemach. Hello.
Yeah, hi, how are you?
Praise Allah.
Okay. I want to know, I contacted the Institute via email.
Yeah.
I was told I was forwarded my question because I wanted to know how much research the Institute was doing on Shemitah.
I wrote a whole thing about it and I sent it back to you.
I didn't receive it because—
Check your spam.
Take to what? The spam.
Check your spam filter. Comes from VC.
Oh, okay, maybe
2000.
that's where it ended up. Are you the only one doing Shemitah research at the Institute?
Oh, come on, dude. You really think they would have more than one? Yes, the short answer is yes. I am blessed with 2 nice technicians.
Okay.
I have been blessed with the other kind sometimes, but currently it's good. And I've had the occasional graduate student, and yeah, so we go on. The thing that I'm doing right now, yes, on Erev Shabbos, I walked around where we have pruned table grapevines, as it were, before Shemitah, trying to see how that's coming along. Tomorrow I'm going to be harvesting some wheat that has been treated so that the seeds will be able to withstand drought. I'm going to be doing it in the northern Negev, so any tehillim that you have to spare might be useful.
Very good. Okay. And
okay, so check it out. Check it out. Write to me if you don't find the answer, and I'll dig out the answer and send it to you again.
Okay, so you're available for other questions on a private basis, right?
How much you got?
Well, you'll have a lot of questions from me. You'll see.
Okay.
The reason I'm saying is because I'm a blogger at the moment for Times of Israel, and I'm trying to get people interested in the subject. So I will be contacting you as far as that's concerned. Okay.
Okay, but you should look up my name and Shmita, because I get interviewed ruthlessly every 7 years or so, and some articles have come out already. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Okay, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Question?
Sure.
I was wondering, first of all, thank you very much. It was a fascinating lecture.
Thank you.
Looking forward to the next one. And my question is it possible to get the your PowerPoint?
How do you want to get it? I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough.
I
can also ask Melissa for the recording. That's
yeah,
okay.
I'm not sure that I want it going around. I don't mind if you have the recording of the talk and you distribute that. That's entirely fine.
Okay. Fair enough.
If you had specific things, a specific slide that you wanted, then yeah, maybe. A pretty picture. I have pictures of Rabbonim and Kafir.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions? Well, thank you very much for your attention. I'm gratified by the questions and by the number of people who are listening. Unexpected. And wish you all a continued good week, a continued safe week. And
people who want to join next week.
See you again in 7 days.
If people want to join next week and they didn't hear this one, they should be able to follow. Yes, or they should listen to the recording.
Oh, the background. I devoted about a third of it to the background on Shemitah this time. I will hope that people have a somewhat understanding. But if there are questions, and I remember not to be too snippy, then I will answer the questions nicely and make sure that everybody is on the same page.
Guys, thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Okay. Have a good evening.